Imagine a house standing still while the entire foundation beneath it is quietly moving downward. It is like a home placed on a giant elevator, descending a little farther every year. Along northern Java, many cities are sinking faster than the surrounding ocean is rising. In some places, roads once kept dry now receive tidal water even beneath completely calm skies. Seawalls are raised and floors are rebuilt, yet the ground below continues to sink. By ordinary logic, a city below sea level should not function when water constantly searches for a way in. Water should win, because gravity always pulls it toward places that are becoming lower. If the pumps stop, canal water may lose its exit while the tide outside remains high. If an embankment weakens, even an ordinary tide can become a prolonged intrusion. If wells keep pumping deeper, the soil supporting the city may continue to compress. Yet above that sinking ground, millions of people still work, trade, commute, and build every day. The pumps keep running, the gates keep moving, and the roads continue to be raised. Low neighborhoods survive behind a defensive system that is barely allowed to rest. This is not a story of every Indonesian island disappearing beneath the ocean at the same rate. It is coastal Indonesia, where land sinks as the sea advances, creating a dangerously uneven race. Indonesia is made of thousands of islands, but every coastline has different geology and elevation. High volcanic regions do not face the same danger as low alluvial plains beside the sea. Jakarta grew across a river delta, where young sediments remain soft and rich in water. For generations, rivers carried sand, silt, and clay seaward, building layers that were never fully stable. Those sediments behave like stacked wet cushions, compressing further when water and pressure change. At first, low coastal land offered major advantages: ports, rivers, fishing grounds, and easy trade. The city grew because of water. Then its demand for water began changing the ground beneath it. Piped water networks could not keep pace with population growth, housing, and economic activity. For many households and businesses, drilling a well became the fastest route to a reliable supply. Each well looked small, but thousands pumping together created enormous pressure underground. Groundwater once filled the spaces between soil grains, serving as both a resource and structural support. When pumping exceeds the rate of natural recharge, the underground water level begins to fall. Concrete and asphalt send rainfall quickly into drains instead of letting it soak slowly underground. Meanwhile, towers, roads, and industrial zones add more weight to young coastal sediments. That weight is not the only cause, but it can accelerate settlement in already soft ground. Along the coast, mangroves once formed a flexible transition between ocean waves and dry land. Their roots slowed water, trapped mud, and gave the shoreline more time to adjust naturally. When mangroves became ponds, ports, or construction sites, that natural buffer was broken apart. The coast lost its obstacle while houses and infrastructure kept moving closer to the sea. The crisis emerged from many reasonable choices that became dangerous when combined on low ground. The first response was not a megaproject, but small changes made at the doors of individual homes. Residents raised thresholds, lifted belongings, and chose higher routes whenever the tide arrived. Shops moved goods onto taller shelves, turning a few centimeters into precious safety. Some homes raised their floors repeatedly, leaving doorways lower with every new layer. Roads were raised as well, but neighboring houses often became the next low points. At vulnerable locations, small earthen embankments and concrete walls appeared beside the water. They blocked part of the tide, but required constant repair as the ground below kept sinking. Portable pumps appeared, pushing water from narrow alleys after high tides or heavy rain. Tide schedules became part of daily life, much like working hours or shop opening times. Commuters changed their departure times because a dry route in the morning might flood by afternoon. Schools and clinics raised essential equipment, preserving a few rooms when water entered. In coastal villages, wooden walkways connected homes when the ground itself could no longer be trusted. Some communities replanted mangroves, hoping to rebuild the buffer that had disappeared offshore. Brushwood barriers were placed across mudflats to slow waves and trap sediment. This imitates nature by reducing water energy instead of trying to stop every drop. Yet young trees struggle when waves are strong or the mudflat sinks faster than sediment can build. Community solutions can buy time, but they cannot repair an entire city's water system and planning. When flooding spread across districts, isolated defenses had to become a connected network. Local embankments gradually linked with drains, tidal gates, pump stations, and retention basins. The house on the descending elevator now required an entire urban machine to keep water outside. Once defense becomes a system, every canal must have a clear source and a clear destination. Tidal gates close when the sea is high, preventing salt water from flowing backward into lower canals. But when those gates close, rainwater and river water inside can no longer drain naturally. Pumps must replace gravity, lifting water from the low city over the embankment and back to sea. Retention basins hold water temporarily when heavy rain arrives together with a high tide. A seawall turns a neighborhood into a bowl, protected outside but forced to drain from within. Every centimeter of sinking makes that bowl deeper and increases dependence on power and maintenance. Workers must clear trash, mud, and branches because one blocked intake can weaken an entire route. Pump stations need backup electricity because power failures may arrive at the worst possible moment. Water levels are watched continuously to decide when gates close, pumps start, or neighborhoods are warned. Satellites and positioning instruments reveal sinking zones long before the movement becomes visible. Survey markers on bridges, ports, and streets turn slow motion into evidence that can be compared. Subsidence maps show that danger is uneven. Neighboring districts can move in very different ways. That is why a citywide average can hide locations sinking far faster than the rest. Groundwater management requires knowing who pumps, from what depth, and for what purpose. A ban on paper means little when residents still lack a dependable piped water supply. Expanding clean water service is therefore an anti-subsidence project, even far from the coast. Repairing leaks matters because wasted water forces the system to search for additional sources. Permeable spaces, small lakes, and sunken parks hold rainfall instead of sending everything into drains. Yet shallow rain infiltration cannot fully restore deep aquifers depleted over many years. Outside the city, mangrove recovery needs sediment, suitable tides, and room for the forest to migrate. When trapped between the sea and concrete walls, mangroves have nowhere to retreat. Coastal planning must therefore leave space for people, infrastructure, and moving ecosystems. A complete system does more than block water. It must slow the causes pulling the ground downward. To understand why that is difficult, the story must descend between the water-filled grains of soil. An aquifer is not an empty underground lake, but countless spaces between sand, gravel, and rock. In soft sediment, groundwater pressure shares part of the weight pressing from above. When a well removes water, pressure falls and more weight transfers onto the soil framework. The grains press closer together, pore spaces shrink, and the entire sediment layer becomes thinner. Each layer compresses only slightly, but across great depth, the surface can sink significantly. This is why a deep well can affect a street even though no large cavern exists between them. If deformation is small, returning water may restore pressure, but major compaction is often irreversible. Once pores collapse, the ground is not only lower, it also loses part of its water storage capacity. Stopping pumping may slow the sinking, but it cannot guarantee the surface will rise again. Clay is especially sensitive because losing water causes its fine layers to compress slowly but persistently. Sediments also settle naturally, but human activity can accelerate that process dramatically. Urban weight adds pressure, especially where soft ground supports dense construction. Yet blaming buildings alone ignores the larger role of removing water from underground. When land sinks, rigid pipes, bridges, and railways do not always move at the same rate. Uneven subsidence creates cracks and new slopes that can be more damaging than uniform movement. A canal that once drained by gravity can lose its slope when one section sinks faster than another. Drain outlets may fall below high tide, allowing seawater to push backward into the system. That is when the sea seems to rise quickly, even though part of the motion comes from sinking land. The crucial measure is not sea level alone, but the distance between water and local ground. If the sea rises slightly while the land falls much more, relative water level rises rapidly. High tides do not cause subsidence, but they exploit every centimeter of elevation the city has lost. Waves push water ashore in pulses, while the tide raises the starting point of every wave. Heavy rain attacks from another direction, sending inland water toward estuaries blocked by the tide. A district can therefore flood from the sea, the river, the rain, or all three together. Subsidence makes all three harder to manage by lowering the final destination of drainage. Without mangroves, waves retain more energy when they reach mudflats and coastal structures. That energy stirs the mud, carries fine particles away, and prevents the shore from rebuilding. Losing sediment lowers the tidal flat, allowing the next waves to travel farther inland. Inside mangroves, trunks and roots redirect water and gradually absorb part of its energy. Slower flow allows sediment to settle and build new material around roots and mudflats. But mangroves work best when they are wide, healthy, and supplied with enough sediment. A thin line of trees cannot offset rapid subsidence, strong erosion, and altered sediment flow. Hard seawalls reflect waves and may concentrate erosion around their exposed ends. Protecting one shoreline can transfer pressure to the next when defenses are not coordinated. As the city expands, more sealed surfaces and more people depend on the same drainage network. The more wells people use, the farther groundwater falls and the more difficult pumping becomes. Near the coast, overpumping can also pull salt water into aquifers that were once fresher. Poor well water pushes residents to drill deeper or buy water, increasing inequality. Subsidence, salinity, and tidal flooding are not separate problems. They reinforce one another. The city is sinking from both sides. The sea raises the outer limit while people lower the foundation. A well solves today's demand, but its price may appear years later as lower ground. Cheap groundwater can become the cost of repairing roads, raising homes, running pumps, and strengthening walls. Those costs never appear on the well's bill, yet the entire coastal community must pay them. Wealthier households can raise floors or buy clean water, while poorer families adapt day by day. A tall seawall protects property behind it, but it can also block views and divide livelihoods. The higher the wall becomes, the more rainwater inside depends on gates, pumps, and reliable electricity. If maintenance is delayed, one small failure can weaken an entire line of defense. Embankments also create confidence, encouraging more buildings and assets to occupy very low land. When protection fails or is overtopped, far more property stands in harm's way than before. Raising roads can preserve traffic, but it may redirect water into yards and lower alleys. Raising individual homes also creates inequality, turning unraised houses into pits among taller neighbors. When floors rise repeatedly, ceilings become lower, ventilation worsens, and living space shrinks. Salt water corrodes metal, concrete, and electrical equipment, increasing costs after every flood. Farmland and aquaculture ponds also face changing salinity, making traditional livelihoods less predictable. As productive land declines, residents may depend more on urban jobs that remain exposed to flooding. Mangrove restoration also requires land, often competing with ponds, housing, and existing livelihoods. Planting one seedling does not restore an ecosystem when tides and sediment have already changed direction. Large seawalls can take decades to complete while the ground continues moving throughout construction. The larger the project, the more complex its financing, coordination, and long-term maintenance become. If investment stops at the shoreline and ignores clean water, the city keeps pulling itself downward. If wells are banned without alternatives, the burden falls on those with the fewest choices. If relocation lacks support, residents may lose jobs, schools, and community networks built over decades. The question is not only what gets protected, but who is protected first and with whose resources. Every solution changes water flow, land value, and opportunity, so engineering always carries social choices. The greatest risk is not sudden disappearance, but normal life becoming steadily more expensive. One clear morning, a North Jakarta neighborhood wakes beneath blue skies and finds the street already wet. Offshore, the tide rises on schedule without giant waves, heavy wind, or unusual warnings. Yet water begins emerging from drains because the tide stands higher than the outlet inside. Along the embankment, water slips through joints and pipes, searching for every low point. Small pools connect, turning the road into a shallow stream flowing between houses. Residents do not panic. They lift shoes, move motorcycles, and raise goods as they have before. Their calm does not mean the risk is small. It means flooding has entered the daily timetable. A stalled motorcycle in shallow water can make a worker late and erase a day's income. A delivery vehicle must detour, turning a few centimeters of water into hours of delay. The pumps start, but workers first clear the trash and mud pulled toward the intake. Water is pushed outward, yet the gates remain closed because the tide is still high. Meanwhile, Alleys without pumps continue draining toward the lowest point in the neighborhood. An older home sits below the road, so water enters the living room like a filling basin. The family raised the floor before, but each new layer only buys more time. Behind the embankment, the sea stands so near the rooftops that both seem from different cities. At peak tide, water nearly reaches the wall's edge, although the wind is light and the sky is dry. This is where subsidence becomes clearest. No disaster is required, only an ordinary high tide. Long-term sea rise raises the tide, but sinking land closes the remaining gap much faster. By early afternoon, the tide retreats and pumps reclaim the road one section at a time. People return, shops reopen, and the neighborhood looks almost normal within a few hours. But salt remains inside walls, engines, and pavement, quietly shortening their useful lives. Each small flood leaves a small repair bill until the total exceeds a family's capacity. The danger does not explode in one moment. It erodes the ability to remain through ordinary days. A neighborhood may stay on the map while gradually losing shops, schools, and families able to leave. The true climax arrives when residents realize adaptation in place may not be enough for the next generation. After repeated floods, attention begins shifting from emergency response to the causes beneath the ground. Piped water networks expand, so residents and businesses no longer depend on private wells. Large wells must be registered and monitored instead of operating as nearly invisible extraction points. Effective regulation combines inspections, affordable water, and alternatives people can use every day. Subsidence monitoring must continue for years because only long records reveal whether solutions work. Data helps decide where drains, essential buildings, and construction limits should be addressed first. Power stations, hospitals, and evacuation routes are raised because they must function during floods. Less essential streets can be designed to hold water temporarily instead of remaining permanently dry. Parks and retention lakes give water somewhere to go before it reaches homes. Along the coast, hybrid defenses combine low embankments, mud flats, and mangroves to share wave energy. Mangroves reduce everyday waves, while hard structures serve as backup under extreme conditions. Successful restoration begins with water and sediment flow, not only with the number of planted trees. Local communities are essential because they know tides, erosion points, and the season's seedlings survive. In places already too low, moving gradually inland may cost less than raising an entire settlement. Phased relocation allows schools, services, and employment to move with people instead of breaking communities. Compensation must include distance to work and coastal livelihoods, not only the value of a house. Some places can remain behind strong protection, while others should limit new development before risk grows. New planning must consider future elevation, not only today's shoreline and ground level. The goal is not to freeze every place in time, but to manage change more deliberately and fairly. When defense, water management, and planning change together, the descending elevator can finally slow. The first misconception is that all of Indonesia is sinking at the same speed and facing equal danger. In reality, severe subsidence concentrates in certain deltas, cities, and coasts with particular pressures. The second misconception is that climate change alone is sinking Jakarta while local activity barely matters. Sea level rise is a long-term threat, but subsidence can increase local danger much faster. The third misconception is that building higher walls will solve the problem forever. Walls block the sea, but they cannot stop sinking land, trapped rain, or depleted groundwater. The fourth misconception is that a few rows of mangroves can replace every structure and water policy. Mangroves are vital, but they need space, sediment, time, and coordination with infrastructure. The fifth misconception is that moving the capital automatically solves Jakarta's coastal crisis. Administrative relocation may reduce some pressure, but millions of residents and assets remain in place. Sinking does not mean sudden disappearance. It means the margin of safety is eroded piece by piece. Retreat is not always failure. Sometimes it is the only way to stop passing risk into the future. The turning point comes when the city stops asking how high the wall should be and asks why the land is sinking. The coastline is where consequences appear, but major causes may lie beneath hotels, factories, and neighborhoods. That is why an inland water plant can protect the coast as effectively as a new seawall. An undeveloped parcel can be infrastructure when it stores water or gives mangroves room to migrate. A housing program can be climate policy when it helps residents move without losing their livelihoods. Modern adaptation does not rely on one solution. It combines slowing subsidence, storing water, defending, and relocating. Important urban centers may receive strong protection while less populated areas return space to water. Not every shoreline should remain fixed, because forcing nature to stay still can create endless costs. The city must define thresholds for when repairs remain sensible and when staying causes greater losses. Those thresholds depend not only on water depth, but also on health, income, transport, and recovery capacity. A community is not truly safe if the seawall stands while residents can no longer afford to live behind it. Indonesia's coastal future depends on slowing the land before endlessly raising the defensive limit. If subsidence slows, every investment in walls, drains, and pumps will purchase far more time. If it does not, every new defense is being built on an elevator that is still descending. At dusk, a coastal house remains lit while tidal water begins returning outside. Beneath its foundation, silent layers of soil move in ways that reshape the home's future. Above, the sea behaves as seas always have. Below, the ground responds to the city's choices. When land and sea exchange places, the city must either rebuild wisely or learn when to retreat.